starting. I'm Joe.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome to Sip and Talk. I'm Sunny.
Hey, Sip and Talkers, welcome. Let me just pour the rest of this coffee into my mug here. Perfect. And I'm just flipping through the paper today, and I found a scenario that is just, it's absolutely wild.
Yeah, lay it on me. I love a good wild scenario.
Okay, so imagine this. You go on this long, 2-month vacation, right? Come home, you're super relaxed, you drag your heavy suitcases up onto your front porch, you slide your key into the lock, and it won't turn.
Oh no, that is literally my worst nightmare.
Right. The deadbolt has been completely replaced.
Yeah.
So you drop your bags, you look through the front window, and there is just a total stranger sitting on your living room sofa, drinking from your favorite mug.
Okay, I would absolutely lose my mind.
Anyone would.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. When they see you, they don't panic. They just hold up a piece of paper and calmly say, "This is my house now."
I mean, that sounds like the setup for a crazy psychological thriller. And, your instinct, especially if you live in a place with normal property rules, like Taiwan, for example, is immediate. You don't talk to them. You just call the police. They show up, and they arrest the person for breaking and entering. End of story.
Exactly. It feels like it should be an open and shut case. But when you step into this bizarre intersection where, modern real estate meets ancient frontier law, that black and white picture gets incredibly messy.
It really does, which is exactly what we are unpacking on Sip and Talk today. We're looking into this massive property battle down in Florida that perfectly shows how muddy this gets.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, it ends with a really intense police restraint tactic called the human burrito.
I still can't get over that name. But yeah, we'll break down both sides of that conflict. And from there, we'll zoom out globally to explore the legal mechanics of this concept called adverse possession.
And finally, we'll examine whether this tactical squatting thing could ever work as a loophole for Taiwan's infamously high housing prices. Those empty mosquito houses everyone talks about.
Right. And just as a quick tone check before we dive in, we always encourage you to stay critical and think for yourself. Especially living in an era led by Trump, there's a super strong cultural emphasis on the rule of law, protecting private property, and personal responsibility.
Absolutely. Our goal today is just to objectively lay out the facts, the legal mechanics, and the data. So let's get into this Florida showdown. To really understand how bizarre this incident is, we have to look at the facts on the ground.
Yeah, because there's this massive disconnect between objective legal reality and just, extreme personal delusion.
Total delusion. So let's start with the property manager side of the story, because this house was not some abandoned, rotting cabin deep in a swamp somewhere.
No, not at all. This was a foreclosed home that was actively listed on the MLS, the multiple listing service. It was being professionally managed by a company called Select Portfolio Servicing.
So it was very much in the system.
Exactly. Their reality was totally grounded in standard real estate practice. They had contractors physically going out to the property every 10 days to, chemically treat the swimming pool and clean the interior.
Wow. Every 10 days. That's highly maintained.
Yeah. There was a highly visible real estate agent's sign planted right in the front yard and a standard electronic lockbox secured to the front door. It was an active financial asset just waiting for a buyer.
Right. But then comes our squatter. Let's just call her Ashley. So Ashley shows up, rips the real estate sign right out of the dirt, completely destroys the electronic lockbox, installs her own deadbolts, and just moves her stuff in.
Which is wild.
I mean, from an everyday perspective, that is a textbook case of trespassing and burglary. But she didn't think she was committing a crime at all, did she?
No, and that is where the psychology of this gets fascinating. She was absolutely convinced she was operating strictly within the law. She claimed she was exercising her rights under adverse possession.
Okay, adverse possession. That's a term that sounds very official.
It is, but historically, it's this old Wild West era law designed for pioneers. Think of the 1800s, where people were claiming and working a completely undeveloped wasteland to expand the frontier.
Right, like claiming an empty field.
Yeah, but she saw a suburban house sitting on the MLS unsold for a few months and somehow translated that to mean the property was legally abandoned.
And I really want to emphasize that this wasn't just some spontaneous break-in where she needed a place to sleep for the night. She premeditated this heavily. She paid $4,000, which is basically a shady down payment to some random third-party entity for a stack of completely bogus legal documents.
That is such a crucial detail. She even physically went down to the county appraiser's office. She utilized this quirk in local government where theoretically anyone can walk in and pay a property tax bill.
Oh, wow. So she actually paid money to the government.
Just a tiny fraction. She paid a tiny fraction of the outstanding taxes just to create this official-looking paper trail.
Okay, I see. So she looked at these actions, the fake deed, the tiny tax receipt, and thought, checkmate. The system works. I own a Florida mansion now.
Exactly. It's honestly terrifying how the human mind can construct its own alternate reality. And to fortify this flawed legal interpretation, she actually identified as a sovereign citizen.
Oh, man, I'm so glad you brought that up because we really need to explain the mechanics of that ideology. The sovereign citizen movement isn't just some casual belief.
No, it's super intense.
It's a deeply entrenched worldview where individuals think they possess independent, ultimate authority. It's kind of like sitting down to play chess, but halfway through, you declare that your pawns are actually dragons.
I love that analogy.
Right, like they don't have to follow the grid, and when your opponent objects, you claim you don't recognize the authority of the rulebook. They believe the government is essentially an illegitimate corporate entity. So, according to them, local police have absolutely no jurisdiction over them.
Exactly. They believe the laws only apply to them if they actively consent to them. So when the property manager inevitably discovers the changed locks and calls the cops, the resulting interaction just goes completely off the rails.
I can imagine.
Yeah, the police arrive and she flat out refuses to leave. She's standing inside, screaming through the glass, waving her fraudulent papers, and declaring it is her sovereign property.
Which puts the police in a really difficult tactical position. I mean, they're faced with someone who is entirely detached from legal reality. You can't just reason with her or read her the state statutes.
You really can't. So a master police officer on the scene uses this brilliant psychological tactic to de-escalate what could have been a super violent standoff.
Okay, what did he do?
Instead of calling for a battering ram and, escalating the physical force, he plays directly into her delusion. He calmly tells her through the door that he just needs to verify her documents one more time.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. He acts like a bureaucrat just trying to make sure her legal claim is processed correctly. It's a classic misdirection.
Wow, so he gives her exactly what she wants, which is validation. And it works. He tricks her into opening the door just a crack to hand over the paperwork. And the moment she does, boom, the police breach the house.
But the illusion shatters right then and there, and she doesn't surrender. She violently resists.
Really violently. She's screaming that she can't breathe, she's calling the officers racist, and she is physically fighting them every single step of the way.
Yeah, and because of how aggressively she was fighting back, the police had to systematically escalate their restraint methods. First, they actually had to call in animal control.
Wait, animal control?
Yeah, to safely remove her 2 Pomeranians from the chaos. And then, because she remained a physical threat to the officers and to herself, they deployed a specialized full-body restraint system.
Ah, here we go. This is what law enforcement sometimes refers to as the human burrito.
Yes, the infamous human burrito. Mechanically speaking, it's a heavy-duty restraint wrap. When someone is kicking and thrashing and just violently resisting, standard handcuffs aren't enough.
And pinning someone to the ground risks positional asphyxia, right?
Exactly. So the wrap system secures the person's legs and pins their arms safely against their torso. It essentially immobilizes them completely so they can't kick an officer or injure themselves during transport.
So they literally had to carry her out of the house rolled up like a burrito.
They literally did.
Okay, watching her plan explode completely makes sense. It's essentially attempted theft. But wait, the very fact that she tried to invoke this adverse possession law means that the law actually exists on the books.
It does exist.
I am struggling to see how this isn't just government-sanctioned theft. Let's look at the actual statute she was trying to weaponize. How does this law actually work mechanically?
Well, under Florida Statute Section 95.8, adverse possession is incredibly strict and incredibly difficult to pull off. You can't just pay a fake fee and change the locks over a weekend.
Yeah, this seems way too easy.
The law requires a mechanism of 7 continuous years of what they call open, hostile, and notorious occupation. Meaning you aren't hiding. You're acting like the owner for everyone to see.
7 years.
And plus, you have to file an official return with the appraiser and pay the full property taxes for that entire 7-year period. She had been there for a matter of days.
Right. So her imaginary legal loophole completely collapses under the actual mechanics of the law.
Yeah.
And the consequences are devastating for her.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of this stunt, she got hit with 8 serious criminal charges. We're talking third-degree burglary, violent resisting, assaulting an officer, criminal mischief, and the ultimate irony.
What's that?
She skipped bail and is currently a fugitive. So she tried to use the legal system to steal a house, and now she's fleeing from that very same system.
It really is the tragedy of extreme confidence built on a foundation of just profound misunderstanding.
Seriously. But this brings up a massive question. If adverse possession causes this kind of dangerous delusion and chaos, why would any lawmaker write a rule that rewards breaking and entering? Like, why is it on the books anywhere in the world?
It's a great question, and it requires us to sort of lift the hood and look at the underlying mechanics of global property rights. The truth is, this concept exists in almost all major legal systems, though the hurdles vary wildly depending on where you are.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, in common law systems like the US, the UK, and Australia, the legal friction is intentionally high.
Walk us through the actual timelines. How long does a squatter have to survive in a house to actually get a title?
In California, the mechanism requires 5 years of continuous occupation plus successfully paying all the property taxes. New York requires 10 full years.
A decade in New York. Wow. And what about across the pond in the UK? How do they handle it?
In the UK, the mechanics depend entirely on the paperwork. It's 12 years if the land is unregistered. If the land is registered, it's 10 years.
But there's a catch, right?
A huge procedural caveat. Once the 10 years are up and the squatter applies for the title, the government formally notifies the original registered owner.
Oh, so they get a heads up.
Exactly. The owner then has the opportunity to object. If they object, it effectively hits the reset button on the squatter's claim, making it nearly impossible to steal registered land without the owner noticing.
That seems like a very smart safeguard. What about civil law systems like over in Europe?
In countries like France and Spain, this legal concept is known as usufructuation. In Spain, squatters, who are often referred to as ocupas, are a massive, systemic headache for property owners.
Yeah, I've heard the ocupas are a nightmare for people with vacation homes there.
Totally. They have strong protections against eviction. But to actually gain legal permanent title through usufructuation in these systems, it requires an astonishing 30 years of peaceful, uninterrupted possession.
30 years. Okay, I need to understand the why behind all of this. What is the core logic that makes lawmakers preserve these rules? What's the actual benefit to society?
There are 3 main pillars of legal logic here. The first is economic productivity. You have to remember that land is a finite, limited resource.
Yes, yeah, they aren't making any more of it.
Right. So from a broad macroeconomic perspective, lawmakers vastly prefer that land is actively used by someone who is willing to maintain it. The alternative is having properties sit abandoned, rotting away, leaking water into neighboring units, and becoming physical hazards.
That makes sense. A rotting house drags down the property values of the entire surrounding community for decades.
Exactly. The law favors use over waste. So better a maintained house than a collapsing, dangerous hazard.
Okay, I buy that. What's the second pillar?
Clear title. This is strictly administrative. Historically, surveying equipment was highly inaccurate. People used literal chains and compasses to map property lines.
Oh, right. Like back in the 1800s.
Fences were frequently built 3 or 4 feet into a neighbor's property. Generations lived on land that technically crossed an invisible line on a map. Adverse possession provides a practical mechanism to resolve these generational border disputes.
How so? Like, how does it actually clean up the mess without causing a huge fight?
Through what's called a quiet title lawsuit. If a fence has been in the wrong spot for 50 years and both families have treated it as the boundary, unwinding that history in court would be an endless, expensive nightmare.
The lawyers would make a fortune.
Exactly. So the law eventually just says, okay, the reality on the ground has overwritten the old map. We are redrawing the property line to match the fence. Let's move on.
I see. It's like a software update for historical reality.
Oh.
It cleans up the messy paperwork of the past.
Yeah.
And the third pillar?
Social stability. If someone has lived somewhere peacefully for 20 or 30 years, they have built a life there. Their children go to the local schools. They are integrated into the community fabric.
Right, they're part of the neighborhood.
Yeah, and the law fundamentally prefers to legitimize that long-standing status quo rather than uprooting a family and throwing them on the street just to satisfy a technicality from a 100-year-old deed. It maintains social order.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, adverse possession is essentially an expired but valid contract. It's an administrative cleanup tool meant to prevent society from wasting resources. It is absolutely not a cheat code for stealing a mansion.
Precisely. It's a mechanism for resolving long-term uncertainty, not a reward for short-term theft.
Okay, now, since the core purpose of adverse possession is to prevent vacant, wasted properties from dragging down society, we have to bring this conversation over to a place with a very unique real estate problem.
Taiwan.
Yes, Taiwan. Taiwan is notoriously famous for its sky-high housing prices and its mosquito houses.
Those empty, abandoned investor properties that just sit there collecting dust and breeding insects.
Exactly. If it's so easy to accidentally lose a house in Florida, why hasn't someone tried this tactic in Taiwan's massive market of empty properties?
It's a fascinating theoretical application. You look at an empty building, you know housing justice is a huge issue, and you think, why can't someone just move in, fix it up, and claim it?
Right. It sounds like a perfect solution on paper.
But the moment you try that in Taiwan, you hit a massive, impenetrable legal wall. Now, interestingly, Taiwan does actually have adverse possession laws codified in the Civil Code, specifically Articles 769 and 770.
Wait, really? Taiwan actually has this on the books. What are the actual rules for a squatter there?
The code states that it requires 20 years of continuous, peaceful occupation if done maliciously, meaning you know full well the property isn't yours. Or it requires 10 years for good faith occupation where you genuinely mistakenly believed you had the legal right to be there.
Okay, 20 years is a long time to hide in an empty apartment in Taipei. But knowing Taiwan's highly efficient legal system, there has to be a catch. How does the mechanism actually work?
The fatal flaw for any would-be squatter in Taiwan is a single word in the statute. It only applies to unregistered real estate.
Ah, unregistered. Explain how that changes the game.
In Taiwan, the property registration system is incredibly thorough and highly modernized. They use a system where the state mathematically guarantees the title of the land. 99% of all land and housing is officially and clearly registered with the government.
Wow, 99%.
Yeah. Because the title is clear and guaranteed, there is zero ambiguity. Therefore, adverse possession is completely legally impossible for residential homes.
So you can't just slip through the cracks?
Not at all. If you try to pull a Florida-style squatting maneuver in Taiwan, you won't get a free house. The prosecutor won't even blink. You will be charged with criminal trespassing and theft 100% of the time.
But let me push back on this. Let's play devil's advocate for a second. We all know the economic reality in Taiwan. Some wealthy investors just buy up apartments and let them sit empty.
That's definitely a known issue.
They purposefully let them rot to artificially inflate the market prices by restricting the housing supply. So, wouldn't allowing a bit of aggressive squatting teach those property hoarders a harsh lesson?
I see where you're going with this.
Right. Wouldn't it forcefully redistribute those empty mosquito houses and finally give young people a fighting chance to actually have a place to live?
I completely understand the deep frustration driving that argument. The math for young homebuyers is incredibly bleak, and housing justice is a massive, urgent issue. But this raises a fundamental question about the foundation of a functional society.
Which is?
Destroying the absolute trust in private property rights wouldn't solve the macroeconomic housing crisis. It would trigger immediate, widespread societal chaos.
Chaos. I don't know, it sounds a bit like Robin Hood to me. Walk us through the actual ripple effects. Who actually gets hurt?
Think about the unintended victims. If the law permitted you to just take over an empty house, it wouldn't just be wealthy corporate investors losing out. You would see highly vulnerable populations targeted.
Like who?
Elderly people who have to move into assisted living for a year, families who are away on long medical leaves, or people dealing with complex, multi-year inheritance disputes. Their temporarily empty homes would become prime targets for organized squatting rings.
Oh man, I didn't think about that.
It wouldn't be Robin Hood redistributing wealth fairly. It would be anarchy, where the most aggressive actors prey on the vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a really dark picture. You can't fix a systemic macroeconomic problem with vigilante property theft. So if squatting isn't the answer, what does actual functional policy look like? Because clearly the current system is leaving a lot of people behind.
The real solution requires structured government policy that changes the financial incentives of the market. For instance, legislative solutions like the hoarding tax 2.0.
Okay, what is that, mechanically speaking?
Mechanically, this is a vacant property tax designed to financially penalize investors for keeping homes empty. By scaling the tax rate up based on how many non-owner-occupied properties an investor holds, it essentially forces them to either rent the properties out, which increases supply, or sell them back into the market.
That makes a lot of sense. Use the tax code to force their hand.
Exactly. We're also talking about mandatory social housing management, where the government legally steps in to repair chronically abandoned homes and acts as a proxy landlord, renting them out to those in need.
That tackles the wealthy investors. But what about those really old, crumbling buildings you see in the cities that are just trapped in limbo?
That requires revising the Urban Renewal Act. You need to streamline the legal process for properties trapped in complex, multi-generational inheritance issues.
Because sometimes it's not a greedy investor.
Right. Sometimes a house sits empty, not out of malice, but just because 50 different cousins own a fraction of it, no one can agree on what to do, and the legal friction to sell is just way too high. Smart policy, not squatting, is how you untangle that mess.
Which is so much harder than just changing a lock, but obviously the right way to do it. And hey, just a quick disclaimer to anyone listening who might be taking notes on the real estate market. We are not investment experts.
Definitely not.
We are strictly providing objective data and exploring the legal realities for the sake of education and discussion. Please do not take any of this as financial advice.
For sure. But you know what's truly fascinating here, if we connect this to the bigger picture? It's how this entire discussion loops back to human psychology.
How so?
We watched a woman in Florida convince herself that a piece of paper and a changed deadbolt could completely overwrite the reality of an entire legal system.
It really is wild.
Yeah.
And before we wrap up our analysis today, I want to leave you with a provocative thought about where this is heading.
Ooh, I love a good thought experiment.
Think about this. If property laws like adverse possession exist to prevent the physical waste of land, what happens when our digital real estate gets abandoned?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Think about web domains, cryptocurrency wallets, or virtual land in the metaverse. As our lives move increasingly online and these digital assets are lost or forgotten, will we see the rise of the digital squatter?
That is a crazy concept.
Will the law eventually say, use this digital space or lose it? It's something to think about.
It's a fascinating frontier. The law might be slow and it might seem unfair when dealing with modern housing prices, but it is the bedrock of societal order. You can say the magic words, you can declare yourself a sovereign citizen, but the line between fighting for your rights and falling into total delusion is understanding that the law ultimately protects true ownership, not just whoever is bold enough to break a lockbox.
Exactly. Belief doesn't make it a reality. If you enjoyed exploring this topic with us today, make sure to subscribe to Sip and Talk. We love bringing these real-world puzzles to you. Also, we have to give a huge, enthusiastic shout-out to our good old friend, Mickey.
Yes, you guys absolutely have to go check out his stuff.
Head over to YouTube and subscribe to his channel, Mickey to Life. He has been putting out some incredible travel vlogs lately, and you do not want to miss what he's up to. He is exploring some amazing places, and it is highly worth your time.
So true. Go subscribe to him.
So next time you go on vacation, at least you know your physical house is safe from legal loopholes. See you next time.
Bye. Bye, everyone.